Hong Kong, Asia's world city, the shimmering example of golden opportunity. This densely packed metropolis is built upon the foundation of trade and conglomeration between the East and the West. But despite all the glamour and wealth, beneath the veil that shrouds Hong Kong's identity lies a truly despicable and dark colonial history, a conflict between the immense imperialistic power of Great Britain and the sovereign nation of China. Today, on The Singularity, we shall be discussing the origin of Hong Kong and of the war that started it. For generations, China had held itself in isolation from the world and its politics and refused itself to enter the global market. But one single dispute over trading rights led to a full-scale war that dictated the future of China, that consequently led to a massive inundation of foreign influence which bore the tidings of a new century of development. This conflict was birthed from the desire of two highly addictive and profitable products, tea and opium. Tea, a product that is stereotypically associated with Great Britain. 19th century Britons absolutely loved their tea and was a common staple with those of the middle class. But there was only one problem. Despite the British lust for tea, there's virtually only one place in the world it was manufactured in, the Celestial Empire of China. Chinese trade utilizes silver as its currency, unlike Britain that used gold as its standard. The British weren't even able to trade directly with China as they were stationed outside the city of Canton in order to conduct trade expeditions. This created a massive deficiency in trade between the two nations. Britain even went as far to send a delegation that offered British products in exchange for tea, but they were flatly refused, with the emperor stating,
"Our celestial empire possesses all things in prolific abundance and lacks no need of products within its own borders."
Britain had to find a solution to obtain the tea that they highly craved. Opium, a highly addictive narcotic derived from the latex of poppy seeds, were a highly abundant resource in British-occupied India.
The British East India Company had monopolized the entire industry and were mass producing and shipping the narcotic in its tens of thousands to the city of Canton in China. They did this through the use of smugglers and easily corruptible officials that granted them access to the region. They were able to trade the drug for silver, which they then used to buy tea with.
The drug quickly spread and corrupted the entire nation. Millions of peasants were addicted to the narcotic by the 1830s, and the death penalty was issued by Commissioner Lin Zexu for anyone found trading or possessing the drug. The commissioner then confiscated over 1,000 tons of opium and had it destroyed in May 1839. The massive quantity cost around £2 million, and the destruction of their goods led to a massive outrage over the British traders. The merchants appealed to the British government, but despite their pleas, the government was unwilling to indemnify the merchants, as they believed that it was the Chinese government's responsibility to compensate for the loss. A massive public debate broke out over whether or not China should pay for the destruction of British products, but the debate was won in the favor of the merchants, and the government sent an armed envoy of troops to give its demands to China. These demands included the compensation for the destroyed goods, as well as the abolishment of the Kohong monopoly. The fleet arrived at June and immediately blockaded the Pearl River, and sent a delegation north to deliver Britain's demands. The British went on a crusade, virtually annihilating any opposition from the Chinese defenses. They easily captured and blockaded more ports. The strength of the British military proved far too much for the Chinese soldiers. Whilst they were equipped with a variety of old-fashioned weapons, such as swords, spears, and bows, the British utilized massive cannons and muskets. The Chinese weren't able to fend off against the titanic British frigates that completely obliterated the Chinese junks with a single broadside. Local authorities and officers proved resistant towards the thought of losing a war, and therefore did not warn the emperor of the complete obliteration of the Chinese coastal military and the loss of major ports, and instead told tales of glorious victories and heroic sacrifices, when in reality it was a total slaughter. And this led to a false sense of morale in the capital, as well as many inland cities. In 1841, the British assaulted two coastal forts that stood as sentinels to the mouth of the Pearl River. In less than an hour, over 500 Chinese had died, and a paltry amount of 38 wounded amongst the British. This naval battle also introduced the arrival of Nemesis, the first steam-powered iron-armored warship. the British onslaught continued, with more battles fought along the coast. And as the British gained more and more territory, they then began their assault on Canton itself. By the end of May 1841, the assault was so devastating that the locals had to pay £6 million in order for the fleet to withdraw. After a few more coastal raids along the Pearl River, the British finally reached Zhejiang in 1842. The British assault upon the city left many of its inhabitants dead and the city itself demolished. With this victory, the British forces were able to push on to Nanjing. The Chinese government were at a predicament: either fight, sacrificing thousands and potentially losing their entire nation to British control, or to surrender and agree to Britain's war terms. So, on August 29th, 1842, the two nations met together aboard the HMS Cornwallis, docked at Nanjing. This was the first of many unequal treaties that China had to fulfill. The treaty entailed that China paid £20 million to compensate for the war, to open 5 ports to international trade, abolish the Cohong monopoly, and to grant the island of Hong Kong to Britain. This marks the end of the First Opium War, a truly tragic and destructive time for Imperial China, as well as an appalling glimpse of what men might do when overcome by their lust and their greed. Throughout these two wars, we can see some evident similarities between them. The Second Opium War started on October 8th of 1856 and ended on October the 18th, 1860. In both cases, the foreign powers were victorious and gained commercial privileges, legal and territorial concessions in China. Foreign powers were no longer afraid of China because she showed their weakness during these two wars. One of the prominent impacts on China is that the Chinese always end up signing unequal treaties. After the war, the Chinese government realized that the Western armies had a more mighty and powerful navy. China must try to understand Western culture, especially if they want to beat the West. They translated materials from the West and published books on Western countries and culture. They learned about Western political ideas, social structures, and their economies. For the first time, China set up a foreign ministry. They had to modernize its army, and the political system needed to be changed, resulting in overthrowing the Cheng dynasty, and China slowly evolved to the People's Republic of China.